Hello friends, welcome back to my channel Wanderlust Rendezvous. As you watched in my last video, I am still in Phnom Penh, Cambodia's capital. Today's video may be a bit depressing and even disturbing to at least some of you. Cambodia or Kampuchea, as in Khmer language, is known for its rich arts and cultural traditions inherited from its Angkorian period. But during the not so long ago past, it had a very dark period between 1975 to 1979. During this period, it was under the Khmer Rouge Regime, a political outfit whose members were from Communist Party of Kampuchea under the leadership of Pol Pot. The Khmer Rouge regime was highly autocratic, totalitarian, xenophobic, paranoid and repressive. Many deaths resulted from the regime's social engineering policies, and the Moha Lout Plaoh, an imitation of China's Great Leap Forward, which caused the Great Chinese Famine. The Khmer Rouge's attempts at agriculture reform through collectivization similarly led to widespread famine, while its insistence on absolute self-sufficiency, even in the supply of medicines, led to the death of many thousands from treatable diseases such as malaria. The Khmer Rouge regime murdered hundreds of thousands of their perceived political opponents, and its racist emphasis on national purity resulted in the genocide of Cambodian minorities. Arbitrary executions and torture were carried out by its cadres against perceived subversive elements or during genocidal purges of its own ranks between 1975 and 1979. Ultimately, the Cambodian genocide led to the death of 1.5 to 2 million people, around 25% of Cambodia's population. In the 1970s, the Khmer Rouge were largely supported and funded by the Communist Party of China, receiving approval from Mao Zedong. It is estimated that at least 90% of the foreign aid which was provided to the Khmer Rouge came from China. The regime was removed from power in 1979 when Vietnam invaded Cambodia and quickly destroyed most of the Khmer Rouge forces. The Khmer Rouge then fled to Thailand, whose government saw them as a buffer force against Communist Vietnam. The Khmer Rouge continued to fight against the Vietnamese and the government of the new People's Republic of Kampuchea until the end of the war in 1989. The Cambodian governments in exile, including that of Khmer Rouge, held on to the Cambodia's United Nations seat with considerable international support until 1993, when the monarchy was restored and the name of the Cambodian state was changed to Kingdom of Cambodia. A year later, thousands of Khmer Rouge guerrillas surrendered themselves in a government amnesty. I will first travel to Tulslang Museum, which is inside the city. It is a bit unfortunate that a few of the tourist industry's selling points for Phnom Penh has to do with genocide that took place in 1970s, when in fact Khmer culture, especially its arts and music, are indeed very remarkable. This was a former secondary school converted as security prison S21 by Khmer Rouge. Immediately after Khmer Rouge fled, 14 highly decomposed bodies were recovered from here and they were buried in the courtyard. An estimated 20,000 prisoners were brought to this prison and at any given time held 1,000 to 1,500 prisoners. These are the 10 rules read out to the prisoners when they are brought here, to be followed during their incarceration. In 1979, Ho Van Thay, a Vietnamese combat photographer, was the first journalist to document Tulslang to the world. Ho and his colleagues followed the stench of rotting corpses to the gate of Tulslang. The photos of Ho documenting what he saw when he entered the site are exhibited in Tulslang today. The photos taken by Ho is exhibited in the same room. In each photograph, the mutilated body of a prisoner is chained to the bed, killed by his captors only hours before the prison was captured. The site has 4 main buildings, A, B, C and D. Building A holds the last cells in which the bodies of the last victims were discovered. Building B holds galleries of photographs. Building C has rooms subdivided into small cells for prisoners. Building B exhibits memorabilia and instruments used for torture. The buildings were enclosed in electrified barbed wire, with classrooms converted to tiny prison and torture chambers, windows secured with iron bars and barbed wire to prevent escapes and suicides. The prisoners were repeatedly tortured and coerced into naming family members and close associates, who were in turn arrested, tortured and killed. In the early months of S21 existence, most of the victims were from the previous Lon Nol regime that included soldiers, officials as well academics, doctors, teachers, students, factory workers, monks, engineers and artists. Later the party leadership's paranoia turned on to own ranks and purges throughout the country saw thousands of party activists and their families brought to Tulslang and murdered. The judicial process of the regime for minor or political crimes began with a warning from Angkar, the government of Cambodia under the regime. People receiving more than 2 warnings were sent for re-education, which meant near certain death. People are often encouraged to confess their pre-revolutionary lifestyles and crimes such as contact with foreign sources, international relief or government agency, even contact with any foreigner, being told that they would be forgiven and wipe the slate clean. They take them to a place such as Tulslang or Chong Ek for torture and execution. The shackles were fixed to alternating bars and prisoners slept with heads in opposite direction. Prisoners were routinely beaten and tortured with electric shocks, searing hot metal instruments, and hanging. Other methods for generating confessions included pulling out fingernails while pouring alcohol on the wounds, holding prisoners' head underwater, and the use of waterboarding technique. Waterboarding is a form of torture in which water is poured over a cloth covering the face and breathing passages, causing the person to experience the sensation of drowning. The prisoners were sometimes forced to eat human feces and drink urine. Inside S21, babies and children were forcefully taken away from their mothers and relatives. Khmer Rouge followed a meticulous documentation similar to Nazis, transcribed from tape-recorded confessions, typing the handwritten notes from confession, mugshots of prisoners when they arrived, pictures of those who died while in detention, and pictures of important prisoners after they were executed. The Khmer Rouge exploited desensitized conscripted children in their early teens to commit mass murder. This is Chum Mei, who had never heard of CIA before, but after 10 days of torture he was ready to confess. Only 3 out of 7 adults who survived the torture at Tulslang are alive today. 2 of them return to their cells every day to remind people what they went through during those days. Chum Mei had been working as a mechanic for the Khmer Rouge when suddenly he was arrested on 28 October 1978 and taken straight to S21. The helplessness in the eyes of this victim's photograph is still haunting me, even though I have left Tulslang. From Tulslang, I now travel to Chong Ek or Killing Fields, which is about 12 kilometers away. The Cambodian journalist Dit Pran coined the term killing fields after his escape from the regime. Killing fields are a number of sites in Cambodia where collectively more than 1 million people were killed and buried by the Khmer Rouge regime. The best known monument of Killing Field is here. The prisoners after trial at Tulslang were taken to Killing Fields for carrying out the execution. Today, Chong Ek is a memorial marked by a Buddhist stupa. The stupa is 62 meters tall and have 17 glass stories, filled with more than 5,000 human skulls, of which many have been shattered or smashed. The memorial park here is built around these mass graves of many thousands of victims, most of whom were executed after interrogation at S21 Prison at Tulslang. Analysis of 20,000 mass grave sites by the Yale University indicates close to 1.3 million executions during the period. Estimates of total death resulting from Khmer Rouge policies, including deaths from disease and starvation, range from 1.7 to 2.5 millions out of a population of roughly 8 million during 1975. Many dead were former political prisoners who were kept by the Khmer Rouge in their Tulslang and other Cambodian detention centers. The majority of those buried here are Khmer Rouge killed during purges within the regime. In order to save ammunition, the executions were often carried out using poison, spades or sharpened bamboo sticks. The soldiers who carried out the executions were mostly young men or women from peasant families. The executed were buried in mass graves. Mass graves containing 8,895 bodies were discovered at Chong Ek after the fall of Khmer Rouge regime. Fragments of human bone, bits of clothes are scattered around the disinterred pits. In many cases, children and infants of adult victims were killed by having their heads bashed against the trunk of this rain tree and then were thrown into the pits alongside their parents. Commonly, bones and clothing surface after heavy rainfalls due to the large number of bodies still buried in shallow mass graves. Some victims were required to dig their own graves. Their weakness often meant that they were unable to dig very deep. Whole families, including women and children, ended up in prisons and were tortured because the Khmer Rouge feared that if they did not do this, their intended victims' relatives would seek revenge. Pol Pot once said, "If you want to kill the grass, you also have to kill the roots." stay in Phnom Penh, and tomorrow I am leaving for Siem Reap.